Hi everybody, I'm Jimmy, and this is Bright Insight. So today I want to talk with you about the unfinished obelisk located in the Aswan quarry in Egypt. More than 137 feet long, and if finished would have weighed at least 1,200 tons. It would have been the world's largest obelisk by far. Now you may be familiar with other obelisks, most notably the Washington Monument located in Washington, D.C. However, unlike the Washington Monument, this obelisk is carved out of solid bedrock, particularly rose granite, with a high concentration of quartz, which puts it at a 7 out of 10 on the Mohs scale of hardness, thus debunking what modern Egyptologists claim were the tools utilized in order to carve this stone. For example, dolerite stone hammers and bronze chisels are what modern Egyptologists claim were utilized in order to carve this solid piece of bedrock into an obelisk. However, a significant amount of modern stonemasons have claimed that, well, that's just not possible, and that it would essentially be like trying to cut and carve wood with another piece of wood. Just doesn't work like that. So the question becomes, if dolerite stone hammers and bronze chisels were not utilized to construct this project, then what would have been done? When you look at these photos here, you can clearly see some sort of scoop marks with some sort of technology that we're not familiar with. However, it's very important to understand that this is solid bedrock, rose granite, and that what was ever utilized had to have either been steel or some sort of sound resonating technology that we're just not familiar with today. In fact, I highly recommend that you check out Brian Forrester's YouTube channel or his website, hiddenincatours.com, where many of these photos do originate from. However, I did source all these photos from Google Images. Now, he has demonstrated that if they were utilizing bronze chisels and stone hammers, they couldn't possibly have made these types of incisions on the underbelly of this stone obelisk. And in fact, you can clearly see in these photos that the angle would not have allowed anyone to make these type of cuts with those type of tools. And despite the fact that those tools weren't strong enough to do it in the first place, i.e. the bronze chisels, clearly some other explanation is required. Now, the argument of how they cut this is one thing. And sure, yes, it's possible that over time with enough people pounding stone hammers could have done some of this, I suppose. I think it's incredibly unlikely. But let's move past the stone cutting part and discuss how they would have moved it. Now, one of the largest obelisks that was once in Luxor, Egypt, is now at the Vatican. However, to move it in the 1930s, they had to take it apart into multiple pieces only to reconstruct it later. Now, what's interesting about this is that its original piece weighed at least 455 tons, which, having been moved from the Aswan quarry to Luxor, Egypt, is more than 252 kilometers, or 156 miles. So the question becomes, how did they move something so massive? Case in point, in 2012, the Los Angeles Museum of the Arts moved a 340-ton stone in order to be located at the museum. Now, this stone was moved over 100 miles, and it took 11 nights. But to do so, they had to custom order an Emirates International truck that was 295 feet long, 196 wheels, and more than 27 feet wide. And they had to use a million different alternate routes because no overpasses or bridges could sustain the incredible amount of weight for this 340-ton stone. Now, this 1,200-ton obelisk, although it wasn't completed and moved, is 3.5 times that weight. So when you consider the fact that one of these obelisks was moved from the Aswan quarry to Luxor, Egypt, 156 miles away, how did they do that? Look, guys, I don't have all the answers on how they did this, but what I can tell you is what modern textbooks are still teaching in schools today is clearly inaccurate, and that there's far more to the story than what we were taught in school. With all that being said, I highly recommend you research what modern masons are saying, how they've demonstrated firsthand that bronze chisels couldn't possibly have cut this type of stone, and that dolerite stone hammers, I mean, you have to pound it for hours and hours just to create a few crumbs. It's pretty ridiculous. So with that being said, check out some of the research out there that's being conducted by Brian Forrester and many, many others. Anyways, guys, I'm Jimmy. This is Bright Insight. Leave a comment. Let me know what your thoughts are, and like and subscribe and help me spread the message. Take care, everybody.